Hi everyone, and welcome to the next installment in the new Bobby Fischer series. This time we're going to have a look at a game he played against the brilliant American Grandmaster William Lombardy in the 1960 USA Championships. Lombardy had white and opened with e4, to which Fischer answered as usual with c5, the Sicilian defense which he played almost invariably against e4. Play continued with one of the many book lines, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, and now the rarely seen move f3 from Lombardy, and this defends the e-pawn, which is one of black's targets in the Sicilian defense. However, it achieves nothing else, is a non-developing move, and overall is a passive continuation. The usual move is knight c3, which Fischer and almost every other analyst of the Sicilian gives as best play. So what is Lombardy aiming for with his passive move f3? Well, the point is that after the move that Fischer played next, knight c6, because Lombardy has not played knight c3 on the previous move, he's now able to play c4, which creates a Maroczy bind with pawns on c4 and e4. And avoiding this bind is one of the main reasons black plays knight f6 on the fourth move of this opening. It's named after Gysa Maroczy, who was one of the earliest commentators on the strength of the bind, and the idea, of course, is to prevent black from playing d5 and liberating his game, which is an aim in most variations of the Sicilian. Play continued with e6, knight c3, and bishop e7. Playing instead d5 is premature and ends up losing a pawn after c takes d5, e takes d5, and bishop b5. So bishop e7, and now bishop e3, castles, and knight c2, which maintains the bind, as d5 is now controlled by the white queen also, and this is a common move in Maroczy bind positions. However, Fischer had other ideas, and here played d5 anyway, in his own words, reckoning that the loss of a pawn is compensated for by superior development. He also gives the alternative rook e8, saying that it's sound but passive. So play continued c takes d5, e takes d5, and knight takes d5, which wasn't the best way to play. Fischer gave e takes d5 as the correct continuation, because after knight b4 attacking the d pawn, bishop c4 defends it once more. Now bishop f5 threatens to win a piece, and just about forces knight takes b4. So now bishop takes b4, castles, and after rook c8, black regains the pawn, but with an inferior position, so nothing has been gained, and white retains the prospects of a better game. But anyway, Lombardy played knight takes d5. So now comes knight takes d5 and queen takes d5. If instead e takes d5, now again knight b4, bishop c4, bishop f5, knight takes b4, bishop takes b4 check, gives black good play for the pawn with rook e8 coming up next, and white is now forced to play a weak move like king f1. If he plays instead bishop d2, now queen h4 check is picking up the bishop on c4. Okay, so back to the game continuation. Queen takes d5, and now comes queen c7, which is the best moves, eyeing control of the c-file and keeping the queens on the board, which is of course the best mode of progression after giving up a pawn. And black now has good compensation for the pawn, according to Fritz as well as Fischer. Lombardy continued with queen b5, which is the move that Fritz liked as well, but Fischer gave it a question mark, saying that it was too intent on holding on to the pawn, and he thought that bishop e2 was best, or after bishop h4 check, g3, bishop f6, bishop f6, castles, bishop takes b2, and rook a b1, the position is equal and remains imbalanced. But queen b5 is what Lombardy played. And now came bishop d7, which is threatening tactics on the white queen, and Lombardy responded sharply to it with rook c1, and Fischer felt again that, as with queen b5, this move was too optimistic, and he gave queen e2 as best, where white survives at least temporarily after bishop f2 and queenside castling. In the game continuation, Fischer is about to play a great move, and if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Knight b4 is the move, which gives black the advantage in every continuation. Lombardy found the best defense, but knight takes b4, as it loses the exchange but avoids the worst. If instead queen e2, because the queen is attacked by the bishop, now knight takes a2 regains the pawn and keeps up the pressure. Black is better here. Alternatively, queen c4, just moving away from the bishop, is met with queen a5, threatening all kinds of tactics on the king. Best play goes knight takes b4, bishop takes b4 check, king f2, rook a c8, queen d5, rook takes c1, bishop takes c1, and the killer bishop e1 check, which generates a very strong attack no matter how how white answers. For example, if king e3, queen b6 check, king e2, queen f2 check, king d1, bishop e6, queen d3, bishop a5, and rook d8 coming next. Very, very strong attack. Okay, so back to the game continuation. Knight takes b4 is what Lombardy played, and this allows Fischer to play queen takes c1 check because of the pressure on the white queen here. Because after bishop takes c1 comes bishop takes b5, and now knight d5 from Lombardy, which is the strongest move because it allows white to answer with knight takes e7 check in the event of bishop takes f1, with advantage to white. But here comes what Fischer referred to as the scorpion sting at the tail end of the combination, bishop h4 check, which again ensures black an advantage in every continuation. Best play is of course g3, and now comes bishop takes f1 and king takes f1. Playing instead g takes h4 is fairly pointless, as now the bishop can simply retreat and the white pawn structure is badly damaged. So king takes f1, and now bishop d8, controlling the forward movement of this knight. And here the smoke clears and black is the exchange up for a pawn. However, there are still great technical difficulties in winning the game. White's pawn structure is solid, and his knight on d5 is at a powerful outpost. Lombardy continued with bishop d2, which prevents bishop a5, and now Fischer took control of the open c file with the rook c8. And after bishop c3 he played f5, which maintains the pressure, and Lombardy chose to advance his now passed pawn, which is probably the best because anything else would have allowed Fischer to create an isolated pawn to attack. Because f takes e4 is threatened, and there's no f takes e4 because of the pin on the f file. So if the king moves, f takes e4, and this pawn here on e4 is going to be easy to attack. So Lombardy advanced it instead, but now the effect of this is that the knight can be driven from its outpost with the rook c5. Knight b4 is the correct answer. If instead knight f4 or knight e3, then bishop a5 is going to win a pawn eventually. So knight b4, and now bishop a5. It was Fischer's answer, and now black's advantage is growing considerably. Fischer was and still is famous for his technical skill, which is clearly demonstrated in the remainder of this game. Play continued with a3. Playing instead knight d3 achieves little after rook d5. So a3, bishop takes b4, and a takes b4 is the correct move because it keeps the white position solid. Recapturing with the bishop is not as good. Bishop takes b4, rook c1 check, king g2, rook fc8, and black is doing very well. So a takes b4, now rook d5, king e2, which is activating the king and aiming to get the rook into the fray. Fischer answered in suit with king f7, and then came f4, advancing the kingside pawn majority, which is perhaps Lombardy's only chance for counterplay. Fischer got his king further into the game now, king e6, then came king e3, and rook c8, again improving black's advantage, which is now close to a pawn and a half according to Fritz. So rook g1, aiming for g4 with counterplay, which Fischer was quick to put a stop to with rook c4, commenting that black has steadily improved his grip, but that winning chances are still problematic and hinge on sacrificing on either e5 or b4 at the right moment. But now Lombardy played rook e1, which was a gross blunder. Correct was rook a1 in Fischer's opinion. If you want to try and spot why this was such a blunder, then stop the video now. Rook takes c3 check is the reason why, because taking everything off the board except for the kings and pawns results in a 1 king and pawn ending. After b takes c3 comes rook takes e5 check, and the king has to defend the rook. So king d2, now rook takes c1, king takes c1, and this is a good example of the endgame idea of exchanging one advantage for another. In return for giving up the extra material, the black king will now decide the game thanks to its superior centralization. The best way to continue is of course with king d5, aiming to pick up white's queenside pawns, and Lombardy can defend with king d2, but now comes king c4, and all of a sudden white is in dire straits. Lombardy now played h5, but here comes the point. b6 with a5 to come next is crushing. After king c2 from Lombardy, Fischer first resolved the kingside situation with g5, and after h6 he played f4. And the problem here is that after the white king stops the passed a pawn from advancing, the black king will be able to get to the king side more quickly than the white one and gobble up these pawns here, queen one of his own pawns, and win easily. Lombardy could reasonably resign here, and Fischer's advantage is over 7 pawns in this position, so it's completely winning. After g4 came the killer a5. Now after b takes a5, b takes a5, king b2, a4, king a3. There isn't much else white can do. He has to take the a pawn at some stage, but now comes king takes c3, and after king takes a4, king d4, king b3, king e3, and Lombardy finally resigned. It's a forced mate in 11 moves from here anyway. So it was a brilliant game from Fischer that showed once more both his daring style, gambeting a pawn in the opening, and superb endgame vision, the like of which one could reasonably say has not been seen before or since. So I hope you enjoyed this game. Please